Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as part of the continuity of the hospital planning, I am going to touch upon the important aspects today. Nowadays, it is becoming from the point of view of any construction activity for hospitals, where the requirements in the later stages, you want to go in for NABH compliances, you need to factor in certain aspects. So that's what my entire presentation is going to be on. I'll quickly capture those essence of certain requirements which are to be factored in while planning your hospital. To start with, these are the broad content which I'll be touching upon. For those people who are not familiar with what NABH is all about, we'll touch upon briefly what it is, and also something about all the legal requirements. We'll go one after the other. Coming to the NABH per se stands for National Accreditation Board for Hospitals and Healthcare Providers. I mean, it covers all the healthcare entities that are there in operation across the country. And standards were established way back in 2006. In fact, that was the first time Quality Council of India, which is known as the apex institution in India for quality initiatives across the country, it brought in exclusive standards covering healthcare in centers or hospitals. You may ask, what about the situation when before that? Before that, many hospitals were set up just on the basis of maybe the only standard that are available, that is ISO 9000, which is again a generic standard, which only talked about quality initiatives, nothing more. But NABH, taking into consideration the patient safety aspects and patient care aspects, they introduce certain factors which are to be taken into account in case of any hospital, and they want to get accreditation. These things should be in place. So the purpose of setting up this standard was also to meet the compliance towards uniform patient care, because today patient care is something to do with many things. I mean, the chief ones being structural aspects, and then the care protocols that are being given, which normally is supposed to meet all the safety norms also. So they try to bring in these two aspects also within the standards. And while setting up the standard, they try to see that there is no, rather than depending on one single standard for all the types of smaller, larger hospitals, they brought in two levels of standards. That is, they call this a small healthcare standards, SSCO standards applicable for those facilities up to 50 beds, and those facilities that are having bed capacity above 50. That means 51 beds the moment it has got, then you have to meet in the larger standards. So separate standards also later got introduced as part of it, covering dental facilities, and also for Ayurveda, everything separate standards got introduced. Then in 2014, a need was there to introduce something called as a entry level, what they called as a pre-accreditation entry level standards. Reason being that since 2006, 10 years down the line, roughly about 8 years down the line, they felt not many hospitals have latched on to the standard. Reason being, there are a lot of difficult things which are to be complied with, mainly from the point of view, structural point of view, particularly OT requirements, certain legal requirements which are made mandatory in the full NABH standards. So to make the standards amenable to smaller healthcare facilities and make them step on to the quality bandwagon, they introduced what they call is pre-accreditation entry level. So they simplified certain things, with the focus being mainly on practices, quality aspects and all that, rather than on the structural aspects. So you have again here also two levels of standards, that is SSCO standards for entry level and HCO standards, healthcare organization, that is 51 beds and above, separate standards. Then soon they started feeling the need for separate standards for yoga and naturopathy. And then they started bringing in standards for wellness care centers, daycare centers. And then recently they introduced what they call as the nursing excellence standards. And also they started introducing similar entry level standards, which is called as Ayush standards, for all the Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathic hospitals, and followed by the medical imaging standards. So by and large, these standards all followed a similar standard structure. That means they had 10 chapters, 5 chapters covering clinical aspects, 5 chapters covering organization-centered aspects. So broadly, these depict the requirements to be followed in terms of meeting the structure, processes, and also certain measurements of outcomes. This is all about the NABH standards. Now the next question arises, why NABH standards to be factored in when you are looking at constructing a new hospital? Today we find that many already existing hospitals, when they want to go in for NABH, they find either the OT specification that are given as part of the NABH standards are not met, or your CSSD related space planning is not proper. So they have to demolish certain things. That means the existing hospital have to do a lot of modification in order to comply with NABH standards. So it's all the more necessary, you find, rather than spending money later, you plan it even when you're constructing a new greenfield project. Try to factor in the space requirements and the structural requirements. So NABH, when they introduce the standards, it introduces based on what they call as Down-obedient principles. That is widely accepted one in terms of structure process outcomes, which means a hospital, if it has to function, they have to factor in the basic structural requirement from safety point of view. And once safety point of view have been factored in, you have constructed the hospital in terms of the safety, then follow the practices which are, you have a standard protocols which could be practiced. Once these two are in place, then the outcomes that you practice will be always positive. That means you are factoring in all the infection control related practices, all the safety related norms, so that you get positive outcomes. So going by that, you find OT requirements have been very clearly specified with zoning concepts, with the 3 levels of zoning which are to be appropriately factored in, and also the air quality which are required to be built into the OT, which the standard describes in terms of provision of air handling units, certain pre-filter requirements with 10 micron and 5 micron pre-filters in the AHU, followed by that laminar hoods through which the air is supplied into the theater. That means the air is supplied vertically, directed at the operation table through a HEPA filter, which controls the particle size that comes out of it. At the end of the day, you try to get very controlled air quality, which takes care of the infection-related prevention aspects. Similarly, CSSD2 has got a zoning concept because CSSD is a very important area which supplies sterile supplies to the operation theatre, which are very critical in nature. So they also need to meet certain zoning concepts, which are really factored in as part of the standard, having a cleaning, washing area, which is defined as an unsterile area, packing area defined as a clean area, and then autoclaving, sterile storage areas appropriately covering the sterile area, and changing rooms provision. All these are to be factored in. And the other important structural requirements is location of emergency or the casualty, because every healthcare facility, as part of the requirements, there is a mandatoriness at least to take care of emergency situations that are arising. Even you may be having an eye care hospital, but the standard makes it mandatory that you need to have a provision of 1 or 2 beds to take care of those eye care patients who may suddenly develop the requirement of CPR, so that you are only merely stabilizing them in the available space and then referring them to next higher order hospitals. So you need to plan the location of the emergency. If it is going to be a multi-specialty, definitely that's a mandatory requirement. You need to have appropriate emergency with the access areas for the ambulance appropriately defined, and space for triaging. All these need to be factored in while designing the structure. And in addition to that, other access features for the patient that include your wheelchair bound patients, how you need to have a ramp facility for making them enter into the hospital comfortably. In addition to the structure, there are some resource related requirements. You may ask, why is resources coming in at a time of structural requirement? See, today, well and good, the manpower needed, the more you are factoring in, we are going to factor in the cost element also as part of it, because the salaries and wages which constitute a significant portion you need to incorporate into the hospital budget planning. So the NABH mandates qualified nursing. That means need to have requirement in all critical care areas, ratios which are amenable. It talks about in case of wards, the ratio to be for every 6 beds, you need to have 1 qualified nursing. That means BSc nursing or GNMs. The other ANMs are not reckoned as qualified. Similarly, in case of your ICUs, in case of ventilated beds, you need to have 1:1. I mean, for every 1 bed, you need to have 1 qualified nursing. So this is the ratio to be factored, including emergency CCU areas and all that. So the number of manpower you require, nursing manpower, is a significant amount. You need to plan it out. Similarly, the RMOs requirement, minimum MBBS qualified RMOs. In every shift, they need to be there along with the reliever. Because today, hospitals operate 24/7. In each case, you need to factor in appropriate leave relief also. So people accordingly, you need to be factoring in while planning it. Similarly, it requires paramedical staff, technical staff, OT staff, technical staff, or your lab staff and all that, who are all coming at a paramedical staff. You need to plan it out appropriately. Then comes provision for infection control, hand wash facilities, the resources required along with that, safety related aspects, apart from the PPEs which act as consumable, which goes into the project cost, maybe the revenue related expenses, the permanent things in terms of gas pipeline provisioning, medical gas storages areas, etc. Because today you can get licenses only if the structures are appropriate there with respect to medical gas. That means the manifold areas are appropriately designed, right? Then very important things which follow as per the NABH requirements, meeting the Clinical Establishment Act requirement. This is where we say every individual hospital applying for NABH need to be registered under Clinical Establishment Act of the respective state. So today, many of the states have got this approved. So it covers all types of clinics, right? So the requirement in the clinical establishment also is that what is the requirement? What is the registration? If it is going to be a trust or a charitable institution, or going to be run by a cooperative society, or it is going to be a private limited, or it is going to be run as a public sector institution. And the Clinical Establishment Act goes beyond that to specify different levels of services. Level 1 covers very minimum general medicine, obstetric and gynecology, whereas level 2 going to add on other specialties as well. So depending upon how we are registering your hospital into the Clinical Establishment Act, the requirements for all the provisioning of space, everything is governed under Clinical Establishment Act. So you find corridors, how it should be designed, what is the space requirement, lobby area, reception areas, which are all very defined in Clinical Establishment Act. Ward, bed, surrounding space, moving space, etc. are also very clearly defined, including medical, surgical, ICU areas, HTU, etc. What is the bed space requirement? What is the circulation space requirements? These are all very well designed under Clinical Establishment Act. Similarly, nursing station requirements, particularly for OT and procedure rooms, scrub station requirements. So the space required for all these, including in case of a labor table, what is the surrounding space, nursing station requirements, ward store requirement for a labor room. Similarly, for emergency bed, surrounding space, circulation space requirements, all these have been to be factored in while designing, so that when you apply for NABH, you are able to meet those norms straight away. Another next important thing is, thank you.
Yeah,
building
just
permit.
a couple of minutes left. Yeah, just a couple of minutes left.
Thank you. Building permit, plan approvals, which are required today as an alternative. NABH has provided for building safety certificates through a chartered engineer. It is an alternative which has been specified. Lift license requirements, fire safety visa through Shweta's presentation. Requirements are very stringent as per NBC guidelines. Requirements covers, in fact, as an alternative, instead of a fire NOC, they have even specified fire safety certificate through a government approved third party agency, but the certificate to be given by them should meet these checklist requirements. That means whether these are available or not, they need to really give it approved by the third party. Then compliance to PCB. Today, meeting the PCB pollution control norms, depending upon the state requirements. Each state has got certain norms as per the bed capacity. So that you need to provide for. The major requirement coming out of effluent treatment plan requirements. If the bed capacity is of a certain size, you need to provide for effluent treatment plan. In some states, they make it mandatory to provide even sewage treatment plans as part of the pollution control board norms. In addition to that, water that you are letting out should meet the PCB under Air and Water Act requirements. Then AERB complaints, equipment relating to radiation generation equipments, your X-rays, CT scan, mammography, all these require ARB approval. It is again given in two stages. One is the layout approval stage, and then second level, after you have sited and installed the equipment, you need to again have a visit done by the radiation safety officer, and finally ARB certificate for operating the equipment is given. Equipment compliances, again you have to get USG licenses as per PCP P&AT norms, right? And the certificate should meet the medical practitioner's name also to be given in the certificate. Compressor requires certain test certificate. DG set requires an approval, both the type approval, which is given by the manufacturer, meeting the PCB emission norms, and for installation, you need to get EB approvals also. Pharmacy compliance certificate is required, particularly narcotic drug license. You need to get approvals well in advance. For medical gas compliances, boilers we are installing for your laundry and all that, you need to get separate licenses. Storage of diesel or denatured spirit, depending on the volume that you are going to store. For instance, diesel above 1,000 liter storage, you need to have a license. In others, security arms that it comes in where we are using security, which we are going to equip them with weapons. This comes into requirement. Wireless operation, we are going to use wireless within the facility. The other registrations are very common, including if you are going to have a food being supplied by the kitchen, you need to have food safety license for kitchen. Blood bank, we are going to have blood bank licenses. So broadly, these are the requirements you need to factor in. The essence being that before planning your hospital, due to the NABH requirements of structural as well as certain legal requirements, if you are factoring in all this, later you may not expend unnecessary expenses in terms of demolition and other costs. Thank you. Thank you for your time for this.